Okay, so welcome everybody. And so this session, how I imagined it, it's going to be more interactive. So I will ask our panelists questions, and then later on there will be again space, of course, for our participants here to ask the questions as well. So my first question goes to Rasha. Rasha, so PENGON is a member of Friends of the Earth International, which is the biggest network of environmental organizations in the world. Can you tell us a bit about your group? What are some of the main topics and projects that you focused on, both in Gaza and the occupied West Bank? I know specifically that you contributed really immensely with renewable energy projects in Gaza, especially. So if you could tell us more.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for planning for this webinar. And hopefully this will be a way for people to know more about Palestinians and Palestinians' struggles and what's happening on the ground, and also to learn a little bit more about PENGON, the Palestinian Environmental NGOs Network, which is, as you mentioned, Friends of the Earth Palestine, a member of Friends of the Earth International. And PENGON is an NGO. It's a coalition of 16 Palestinian environmental organizations. We're working together to defend the environmental rights as part of our struggle for social and political justice. So as you mentioned, PENGON works in the West Bank and in Gaza. So we have member groups, member organizations who are working in the West Bank and in Gaza. So we mainly work on advocacy and raising awareness about the environmental rights on the national level and also on the international level. We've been working with Friends of the Earth International on different issues, actually, to shed light on different environmental violations that the Israelis violate as some of the Palestinian rights, one of which, for example, is the violation of the right to water, which the Israeli water company Mekorot happens to keep on doing. Also, we're working on different campaigns combating land confiscation and protecting the agricultural heritage, especially in Area C. So Palestine is divided as per the political situation into areas. Area C, as if I mention it over and over in the presentation, or if you hear about it or read it somewhere, Area C is under the full control of the Israeli military. So it's controlled by the Israelis, but Palestinians live there. The Palestinian Authority have no control over this area. So there were, in this area, a lot of law violations happens. So this is one of the things we work on to combat land confiscation in these areas. And also we promote to community-based renewable energies, as you also mentioned. And these solutions, we worked especially with marginalized groups and where areas of off-grid areas. We try to help them with renewable energy projects in collaboration with Friends of the Earth International. We also tend to advocate for environmental justice and sovereignty over our own natural resources, whether it's the land, the water, or the biodiversity, because these are also violated over and over by the Israelis. We do a lot of work in Gaza. We support rooftop solar energy to keep the clinics and the homes and functioning during the electricity blackouts. And this has been going on for years now, because people would be unaware that the electricity blackouts was way before the war. Now I will talk more about the war in a bit, but I want to really shed the light on the blockade and what the blockade has been and influencing the life of the people in Gaza. The electricity blackouts during the past years was something that has affected every aspect in Gaza, whether it's the energy, whether it's the water purification units, whether it's the wastewater treatment units. So it's affecting their lives, their day-to-day lives. Also, PENGON works on documenting the environmental destruction caused by the repeated Israeli military offensives. And we tend to focus on the environmental aspects and the environmental ecocide in Gaza. I will talk also about the projects that we're working on later on in the webinar. I will talk more about what kind of tests we're doing, what kind of work we're doing in Gaza, what kind of researches we're doing. But I want to also say that we also work on the solid waste management studies, water pollution studies, climate adaptation under all of these extreme conditions, whether it's the siege or recently the war. But despite all of these restrictions, our members in PENGON, we remain deeply connected and rooted in the communities, and we're trying as much as we can to build alternatives for the people and for us to keep working.
Thanks a lot, Rasha, for the introduction. We will go, like I said, later on more in depth in your work and in the situation in Palestine. Now I would like to go to Anna and ask you to tell us what the global energy embargo for Palestine is and what some of your key demands are.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for inviting us to this exciting panel. So basically, the global energy embargo for Palestine is a network of activists, of trade unionists, of researchers that respond to a call from several Palestinian organizations that were calling for imposing a global energy embargo, meaning that we want to halt all energy imports and energy exports that are sustaining and fueling the ongoing genocide and Israel's settler colonial regime. And we are also looking at the corporations that are making this possible, trying to hold them accountable for supporting these massive human rights violations. So what we are trying to do now is to organize campaigns across the different countries that are exporting energies or the countries that are profiting for all this system that is fueling and sustaining Israel's settlers' colonial regime.
Thank you. Now, Naomi, welcome back. I mean, you told us already previously about Gastivists, but maybe more related to this topic now. What Gastivists are doing, where are your members from? I know that they're also in the Middle East. And what have you been working on in regards to Palestine?
Yeah, thank you. And it's really, really nice to be here on this panel with you all. So with Gastivists, we started working on the Eastern Mediterranean region about 6 years ago when we learned about the plan for a pipeline called the EastMed pipeline. That is still a plan. Construction has not yet started, which would carry gas from offshore Israel through Cyprus, through Greece to Italy for the European market. So this would cement energy market for Israel to become wealthy. It's quite ludicrously one of the biggest justifications used for this pipeline was energy security from Russia. The EU has a special taste for gas from dictatorships and really oppressive regimes. Also Azerbaijan funding a huge build out of pipelines to take gas from Azerbaijan to Europe was also part of their energy security strategy. It's absolutely ridiculous. But so fighting this pipeline, sorry, that's my doorbell. I don't know if you heard that. I'm gonna ignore it. It's probably the neighbors shopping. What was I? So we started Ismet pipeline. Azerbaijan. Okay, so people didn't know much about this pipeline, and it wasn't being contested in Brussels, where it was getting priority status, where members of European Parliament were supporting giving it a priority status so that it could go past regulatory hurdles faster and get money for like studies, you know, for feasibility and where exactly under the sea could it go. So we did a lot of work to tell people about it, to tell activists all over Europe about it, to get people who have power and leverage in Brussels and MEPs to know about it. And the most beautiful part for me, at least, was that we connected people along the chain of it. And so 2 years in a row, we hosted meetings in Cyprus for people from all the affected regions to come. From Palestine, also including dissident voices from Israel, which was not always easy to navigate, but yeah, also with comrades there. We've been working with people in Cyprus, of course, where the meetings were, northern and southern Cyprus as much as we could, Greece and Italy. And so building a network of people in the Eastern Mediterranean who are connected and understand each other was crucial to us for building power against this project. And it's not just the pipeline, right? It's like this pipeline goes hand in hand with arms deals, sometimes in the same policy papers. For example, with the US promising support for in the same bundle of policies, building this pipeline, building LNG terminals along the way, because if the gas, it's not enough for it to flow through the pipeline, it needs to be able to flow the same route with terminals and also with arms. Like the US organizing a joint training exercise. I can't remember exactly with which countries, and this is being recorded. But you could imagine, and we can send more details later. But it's all kind of bundled up together. So the pipeline was kind of, it's not just about the pipeline, right? But it was a good way to get people talking and get people together and start and build power about it. And then since then, we've kind of kept this work going and been doing a lot of work to try and build an understanding in the European climate justice movement of why climate justice activists need to be busy with what's happening in Palestine and with militarization, and this kind of solidarity, and why they're tied up together, and that there's no way of fighting for a just energy system without talking about occupation and militarization. And the most recent, and so we've been doing some research on this. For example, we published some research soon after the 7th of October about where gas from Israel was still arriving in European LNG ports. Gas currently makes it from Israel to Europe via Egypt, because Israel doesn't have an LNG export terminal. It has deals with Egypt to send it there and then to the markets. So we exposed this, and some activists, for example, the group I told you in the Netherlands earlier, have really included it in their message of that their terminal in Rotterdam cut the ties with genocide. And yeah, we're trying to share this as much as we can also with activists. In Denmark, we've done workshops. We'll do workshops for anyone else if anyone invites us. And I realize I've been talking for a while. The most recent research we did was about a wind turbine project in the Golan Heights. Marusha, is now the moment to speak on this, or is better later?
We can go into that later on.
Later, got it. So I'll finish there.
Thank you so much. Next, Chrissie, I would like to ask you to tell us about Wismar Gas. What motivated you to start a collective? What is the politics that grounds your work, and how do you see your work within the wider climate movement, but also even wider the movement, the ecosystem? What is the role of Wismar Gas?
Thank you so much. And lovely to be here with such, honestly, stars of the movement. So thank you so much for inviting us alongside everyone here. So Wismar Gas has been around for about 3.5, 4 years. It began kind of after reflections and conversations at COP26 between comrades, and began as kind of 4 of us in different global north geographies. One of the things that actually inspired it was one of the comrades attended a talk by the Gastivists, where they really understood from this the kind of alarming presence of gas expansion within Europe and beyond, and the real urgency to understand the imperialist dynamics of it, but also to build a coherent and coordinated resistance to it from different locations. But I think also more broadly a recognition of being in that COP26 space, and understanding how in the regions where we are based, the climate movement is incredibly white, incredibly colonial in many dynamics, and really does not recognize the politics of racism and imperialism that runs through our energy systems, and indeed is very central to their existence. So from this, we kind of had a lot of discussions around how we could try and build a bridge between kind of more social justice movements that were taking these sorts of politics very seriously and were embedded in both their view of the world, but also their way of practicing them, and climate movements, and try and begin dialogue and conversations between these kinds of movement spaces that currently just never really intersected. And this was very obvious to us in the kind of counter COP setup of COP26, where there were also really no social justice movements present, or very limited. And I think this, as a result, kind of really developed our role or our mission, which was, as I say, to kind of try and bridge the gap between movements and create more movement connection, provide space for that to happen, kind of provide examples and narratives to use that could signal to different kinds of groups from a climate perspective that you held these politics and that you were willing to practice them in the way you tackled climate crisis. And then also to really push social movements to understand energy as a very vital point of disruption when we're looking at anti-colonial national liberation struggles and a tool of collective liberation more generally. And for this, we very much learned from many national liberation movements across the global south that have historically used energy systems as a way to disrupt the imperial power that was dominating at the time, from Palestinian resistance movements to the Kurdish movement and beyond. So we really recognized that this was not something new, but that something that we needed to remind people of in the spaces that we existed in. Yeah, and so I think this really kind of also develops the politics in which we practice. We call ourselves an abolitionist climate justice collective, and this is really to signal that we do not believe in policy reform or change when it comes to real system change, but that we learn from Black radical scholarship in the US, the diaspora, and from the African continent around what it means to overhaul or dismantle the system versus trying to work within it to reform it. And I think this is because we see that when we're talking about energy systems and climate justice, that no matter the fuel that is used, whether it's green technologies, whether it's gas, whether it's oil or coal, the systems of repression and subjugation and domination that exist in our society will remain. And so as long as this system remains, it will always be an energy system that requires the repression of some in order for others to benefit. And so to us, being an abolitionist climate justice collective is about saying that that system is what we need to work for to dismantle. So that basically means like revolution by any means necessary, and we support that on all fronts. And that's very much the politics at which we try to strive for, but also something that we try to uphold internally. This means politics of care are really important to us, accountability with our partners and also between ourselves. And really constantly trying to imagine and live the sort of world that we want to create, both in terms of a just energy system, but a just world, and think about that as not just about global transformation, but also interpersonal transformation. And so this is how we kind of guide ourselves in our work as much as we are able to in the system that we live in.
Thanks so much, Chrissie. And for me, you're super amazing, super inspiring. And lastly, Cemre, can you please tell us also about 1,000 Youth for Palestine and what you're focusing on?
Hi all, Dobar dan. Thank you for giving us a chance to be here with all of you. So, 1,000 Youth for Palestine. We are a group of students and working or unemployed young adults. We're struggling to create public pressure to stop Erdogan's collaboration with the Zionist imperialist Israeli oppression over Palestine and Palestinian people. This collaboration involves widespread trade of goods and military intelligence because there are some NATO strongholds in this country. Especially, there is a radar installation in Kürecik that provides critical military intel to the Iron Dome. So what we want is to foster and develop public outrage and create some pressure points so that the government has to stop this collaboration. We are organizing protests and we are collaborating with other groups to gather intel and let the public know what's been going on for the past 1.5 years, almost 2 years now, between the Turkish government and the Zionist oppression in Palestine.
Thank you so much. Now, firstly, I would like to say, Rasha, we are so grateful that you're here with us and dedicating your time with everything that's been happening also in the occupied West Bank. So in those terms, I would like to ask you to give us an update on what is currently happening both in Gaza and occupied West Bank. Thank you.
Yeah, well, it's, I would say, catastrophic. The situation in Gaza, I'll start by giving an update about what's happening in Gaza now. The occupation is leading Gaza to a humanitarian catastrophe. The situation there is catastrophic. The famine, the water scarcity, the collapse of the healthcare system, also the infrastructure systems have all collapsed. And all of this is intensifying the suffering of the people. We're talking about 2 million people in a prison that every aspect of life is cut off. So since March 2025, Israeli blockade has severely restricted the entry of humanitarian aid. No food, no medicine, no fuel, no water. So this is affecting 1 million children. Malnutrition and preventable deaths are rising rapidly in Gaza nowadays. And according to UNICEF and UNRWA, famine is imminent. 335 children under 5 in Gaza are at high risk of severe malnutrition. In northern Gaza, 1 in 3 children under 2 is now acutely malnourished. Over 550,000 women are experiencing acute hunger. 15,000 pregnant women are nearing famine conditions. And all of these numbers and figures I'm giving are according to UNICEF and UNRWA. Also, if we want to look at the water access is a complete crisis now in Gaza. More than 90% of the water's aquifer is unsafe. And also the water that's privately sold to the Gazans, 80% of it is contaminated. Many children in southern Gaza survive only 1.5 to 2 liters per day, which we're talking about like the minimum survival edge. This is way below the minimum survival edge. And also, if we want to look at the energy shortages that's causing cut-offs in several essential services, these power cuts have disabled critical infrastructure, including desalination plants, hospitals, wastewater systems. There's no cooking gas in Gaza. So we're talking about their daily life. It's impossible. It has become a place impossible to be living in. The hospitals that are being targeted, the displacement camps are being targeted. And last month, the only cancer treatment center, which is the Turkish-Palestinian Friendship Hospital, was bombed, and it was turned into a military outpost. Also, other hospitals like Kamal Adwan Hospital, Nasser Medical Complex have been severely damaged and forced to cease operations. The displacement tents in the displacement camps at Kuwaiti Hospital and Al-Aqsa Martyrs Hospital were also pumped. So practically people have no place to flee to. They're placing their tents inside the hospitals and they're also being bombed there. So this has caused civilian deaths and injuries. At least 1.9 million people, which is 90% of the population in Gaza, have been displaced multiple times. Some of our team in Gaza, our employees, PENGON's employees, have been displaced over than 15 times. Engineers that work with us on projects have been displaced over 15 times. And you can only imagine what kind of crisis they're living in. Now, if I want to move back to talking about the West Bank, the situation is not any better. The settlers are escalating the violence with the help and with support of the Israeli military. So I know that the whole world, the whole supportive world is looking on Gaza or is focusing on Gaza, but the West Bank is experiencing another different type of crisis. The violent expansion and the settler colonialism, as I said, being helped and being supported by the Israeli military, the military raids into the cities, the land confiscations, the arrests that have been escalated in parallel with what's happening in Gaza, of course, especially in Area C and East Jerusalem. And this has been also severely escalating in the past few months, where the Israeli military would go into the middle center of the cities to arrest Palestinians. Since October 2023, there has been a dramatic increase in the settler attacks and also in the forced displacements. When we want to talk about the Jordan Valley, for example, on the way from Ramallah, the city I live in, to Jericho, where we travel from Jericho to Jordan, for example, if we're leaving the country. So it's 2 cities. There's the Jordan Valley area, where a lot of Bedouins and a lot of Palestinians Palestinian communities, they live there. The area there is Area C. And a lot of the Palestinian communities, you would see like on both sides of the street, they're completely gone now. Forced displacement since the beginning of the war was severely being done by the Israeli military and also by settlers accompanied by Israeli military forces. As I said, also the raids on the cities, on the refugee camps, like maybe you've seen on in the news, like Jenin, Tulkarem, and Nablus, resulting in deaths, resulting in injuries, resulting in a lot of arrests among the Palestinians. They're trying to also wipe out the refugees in general, the refugee case in general, by trying to wipe off some of the refugee camps in the West Bank nowadays. So also over 700 Palestinians have been killed in the West Bank since the beginning of the war, October 2023. This includes children, human rights defenders as well. The Israeli military has also been systematically targeting the homes, the agricultural lands, and the water sources, and even schools. And when we talk about schools, I would also like to talk about the UN schools, the UNRWA schools that are being subjected to some kind of new laws by the Israelis in some of the refugee camps in the West Bank, that they're trying to close these schools. They're trying in every way to wipe off the Palestinian refugee case. If I want to go back to the environmental degradation, which is also accelerating due to the land confiscation, the illegal settlements expansion, and also the military activity. So Palestinians are facing a multi-layered system of control. The apartheid walls, the checkpoints, settler roads, permit regimes, they're all designed to fragment the communities and limit the access to land and resources.
Thank you so much, Rasha, for this update. I think it's really important that we talk about really ethnic cleansing and genocide in whole of Palestine. It's just not Gaza anymore. So thank you very much for this. I would like to continue with Anna. And to go more specifically into what I mentioned in the beginning, fossil fuels, how are fossil fuels used in fueling the genocide as well as the occupation? And could you give us a perspective more from Palestine, since you are cooperating and encompass Palestinians?
Yes, so here there are like a few aspects. So one of the aspects is that Israel is using energy as a tool of control, as a tool of oppression, as Rasha has previously described. They are cutting off the electricity of the Gaza Strip. They are using electricity cuts as a way of collective punishment. They are denying also permits for Palestinians to build their own energy infrastructure, being that like solar panels funded by external donors. So there is a systematic discrimination in energy access, and that's a human rights violation. That's one thing that should be very clear for everyone. And when we are talking about not having electricity, it means, of course, as Rasha mentioned, it means that we have no hospitals that are being able to run properly. We have no desalination plants, so there is no drinkable water. There are no sewage systems that are properly working. Like basically nothing that sustains life is working properly. And that also means like not having electricity means that you are sitting in the dark at night, scared because they are bombing your areas, they are bombing your cities, and you don't see anything but the lighting of these bombs all over you. And that's a way also of generating more terror, of controlling the population, and is a domination. It's an expression of domination and power. So that's something that is important that we all understand. Also, another important thing that I think is very important to understand is that Israel is not able to sustain all this without external support. Israel doesn't have the energy that developing all this system of structural violence and institutionalized discrimination to carry on this awful genocide. It requires a lot of energy, and Israel is not able to provide that energy, power, all this support without support from external countries. And so here it comes the second question: who is providing Israel with this energy support that is very much needed to maintain and sustain this settler, colonial, apartheid, and genocidal regime? So there are a few countries that are helping Israel into sustaining and foiling this genocide. First, we have countries that are, for instance, exporting crude oil or refined oil, like jet fuel, the one that is used to power all the military vehicles or the planes that are bombing Gaza. All this genocidal machine basically is powered with jet fuel, and this is coming primarily from the US. And is transported by sea in tankers that also generate a massive pollution and CO2 emissions that also accelerate the climate emergency at the global level. So all these fossil fuels that are jeopardizing the lives of Palestinians in all the Palestinian lands are also jeopardizing the sustainability of the whole planet. So yes, we have the crude oil and jet fuel, which has been exported, the jet fuel, by the US. And we have countries like Brazil, that is also one of the exporters of crude oil, and countries that I'm sure Cemre will be talking about this later, like Azerbaijan, Gabon, Nigeria, and others in minor proportions that are also contributing to supply Israel with the crude oil that they need to power all this system of oppression. In terms of coal that is burned to generate electricity, we have Russia, South Africa, and Colombia as the main exporters. And one of the examples also that illustrates very well how the Israel settler colonial regime works, and a reason of why we cannot differentiate between Israel and the settlements, because they are part of the same colonial regime, is how the electricity grid actually works. It is a unique electricity grid. It's not divided. So the coal that is being burned to produce electricity that is then powering this electricity grid is powering the settlements and is powering the internationally recognized borders of Israel. So there is no differentiation. Every country that is exporting coal to Israel is directly rendering assistance to the war crime of the illegal occupation, is sustaining the illegal occupation of Palestine, and therefore they are complicit of war crimes. And they should absolutely stop doing that. They should have stopped that, never done that from the very beginning, because no form of trade is neutral. But when we are talking about energy trade, we are talking about that this energy, all these different fossil fuels, what they're doing is sustaining a genocide, they are sustaining an apartheid regime, and they are sustaining an illegal occupation. Because, as I said, there is no differentiation between so-called Israel and occupied Palestine. There is one colonial regime that is oppressing Palestinians everywhere. There is no distinction between military and civilian infrastructure in Israel. All infrastructure are serving the same purpose, that is trying to raise Palestinians and Palestinian lands. So all this is is part of the same, again, like system of oppression. And as I said, all the countries that are supplying those energies that in terms of coal are, again, like Russia, Colombia, and South Africa, or crude oil, Brazil, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Gabon, Nigeria, and others, or the US in terms of jet fuel, the fuel that is powering all the military equipments, are rendering assistance to these war crimes and crimes against humanity.
Thank you so much, Anna. And continuing on what you were saying, I'd like to ask you, Naomi, from a more European perspective, who are both the countries and fossil fuel companies that have been fueling the genocide in Palestine?
It's really hard to give a specific answer because it's, as Anna just said, really every country that's exporting coal that goes into the power grid. As I said, with the East Med pipeline, every member of European Parliament that supports a project like the East Med pipeline gives legitimacy to Israel. You know, it's a lot of US companies, or like joint US Israeli companies, that are that are the ones really building the infrastructure there. But it's such a web, the system, that I find it hard to identify specific ones.
I know if I may, that, for example, PBS, like one of their main targets is Chevron. So there are some companies that are specifically identified as targets.
Yeah, I think the really big ones, as far as I know, and please anyone else jump in, but it's the Chevron, Exxon, there's Nobel Energy, and then I believe Eni is exploring some of the gas fields offshore. Shell used to be, and then stepped out because it wasn't economically interesting enough. BP, yeah, thank you, BP, totally. And also, I think the flip side of this absolute massive web is that anyone can find a target. So if you want to be busy about and take action in solidarity with Palestine, and specifically with this like energy and climate angle, like every city will have a bank or a politician that's somehow complicit. And that's also something that I know in Gastivists and probably others here, we can help with finding a reasonable target for whom to bring your BDS demand. And I see, Cemre, you had some companies in mind. Maybe you want to say.
Yeah, I was just also thinking of Cemre, if you can give your view on you were also saying the global energy trade Zionists, but also the companies that you know that are fueling the genocide in Palestine from your perspective.
Yeah, okay. For example, Zorlu and Sokar. Sokar is a huge company. It's the Azerbaijani national gas company, but it also has huge capital investments in Turkey as well. They have entire ports operating under their name. So they're basically working a lot for the genocide. So for us, global energy trade is one of the primary causes of the existence of the Zionist occupation in Middle East and Palestine. And we think every other reason and justification for the existence of a state called Israel is imperialist propaganda. So Western imperialism, Turkey is also involved in this, desires a series of unending wars to sustain a cracked, a self-dismantling economy that has been stagnating for the past decades. And capitalist imperialist trade requires a cycle of repetitive crises. So these are energy crises, existential threats. They need this to reproduce their own necessity to exist. So what we see is entire peoples stand in their way. Those people are the true indigenous peoples of those lands. And that's why they do what they have been doing in the rest of the world for the past 5 centuries, maybe even more, to try and exterminate the indigenous people, just as how it's been in New Zealand, Aotearoa, in the Americas, and anywhere else imperialism has touched throughout the history. So that's how we think and how we view the global energy trade, the resource trade that's been happening on Palestine. And that's been oppressing Palestinian people for the past 77 years.
Continuing on that, could you tell us about some of the effects on peoples of Turkey and Kurdistan along with Palestinians and how it feels evidence of authoritarian regime?
So this question is also, again, for us, because I couldn't hear you perfectly, but I think this is our question, right?
Yeah, very good.
So, in our opinion, what we see is that capitalism is insatiable. So it can never have enough because it requires and needs infinite growth to sustain itself. Here in Turkey, it all started from the very beginning. It first destroyed Armenian people, stole their lands, and then Greek people, and then the Turkish imperialism turned to Kurdish people. So I think you're all aware of the BTC pipeline. So this pipeline runs directly through Armenian and Kurdish lands. At Ceyhan, fossil fuels are being loaded onto tankers, which deliver gas to the Zionist entity daily. There's also Zorlu that I mentioned before. They're one of the biggest monopolies in Turkey for energy production. So they have a lot of mining projects. They even have solar energy projects in Israel where they claim that they have stopped working with, but we know that they haven't. And so these monopolies, these companies, along with the Erdogan's regime, they have been working against the Palestinian people and Palestinian land. And all this land and resource theft and all the weaponized effort to ensure that this theft can be sustained, it results in genocides and ecocides, and next to complete destruction of native land and peoples. And we can see this from how people are being starved, how water resources are poisoned or filled with concrete, how villages and neighborhoods are being bombed, destroyed, how olive trees are being pulled out from their roots. And we know that this isn't only happening in Palestine. This is also happening in Kurdistan because Kurdistan is the only path of Turkey towards the rest of the Middle East, at least into both Iraq and Syria by land. And what they want is that they want to hold and have, like, sustain their hegemony over every possibility and opportunity to profit from this energy theft. So they want to destroy anything in their path and have been doing so since the last century. Erdogan's regime is just a continuation of that same policy. So basically, this is how they have been collaborating with the rest of the imperialist forces in the region and to also sustain their own power and put forward their own hegemony. Erdogan wants to have a say in this trade and the way they want to share the lands. So he has been pumping neo-Ottomanist propaganda, having claims over the north of Syria, for example, on Kurdish lands, just so they can control the land routes that are going in and out of Middle East. So this is basically why they have been collaborating with Israel, while claiming also that they are on Palestinian cause, that they're trying to help, they're doing their best to fight against Zionism, but in reality, they are collaborating with private companies, the capital, to take what they can from this global gas trade and energy trade.
Thank you so much for this important point. And I think it's really funny how Erdogan is portraying himself as a friend of Palestinians and going and talking in protests. Wow, it's actually the other way around. So thank you for the clarification. Chrissie, so I want to talk more now. So I mean, it's not only fossil fuels that are fueling the occupation and genocide. We see more and more greenwashing of the occupation and genocide. And so we see also an increasing problem with green capitalism. But perhaps what is less known is green colonialism. Can you tell us more about what green colonialism is, how it functions, and what is the role of fossil gas within it? It would be great to touch on Palestine within this, in addition to also other countries and or regions. Yeah, Chrissie, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, of course, if you don't mind, just before I dive into that question, I'd just like to add something to what Naomi and others said around European complicity. I just wanted to first re-emphasize the role of ENI that was briefly mentioned. Myself and Anna have been working on a toolkit for the past year or so that builds on Palestinian organizations' call to challenge the purchasing of licenses in Palestinian maritime areas. That was done about a year ago by ENI, a Korean company based in the UK called Dana Petroleum, as well as an Israeli company in the same kind of group. And ENI has a really long history of complicity when it comes to this, and there will be an activist toolkit coming out that deep dives onto the role of ENI in this region and Dana Petroleum, as well as gives a lot of concrete examples of allies globally that have suffered at the hands of ENI, from Nigeria, Mozambique to global north countries, as well as Dana Petroleum, and ideas of how to act on it. So if you're looking for ways to think through how to target these companies and what to do, this toolkit could be a great place to start. And we can send it through to Friends of the Earth if that would be useful for any participants when it's published. Also, to highlight the Norwegian company Equinor, and they have a partnership in the North Sea above Scotland in the UK with an Israeli energy company called Ithaca Energy. So I think also when doing research on complicity in your local area, energy companies like to create new names for themselves or absorb other companies and have a new face, and therefore it can often be hard to trace. So for example, Noble Energy that was mentioned earlier is now absorbed into Chevron. So Noble Energy's complicity as well as absorbed into Chevron as well as its own. Similar, Ithaca Energy is a subsidiary of the big Israeli company Delek Fuel that actively fuels the Israeli military and has done for a very long time. So just to point to a couple of others. So when you're partnering with something like Ithaca Energy as Equinor, this Norwegian company, you're partnering with Delek and have direct complicity in this way. And I just thought it could be an interesting methodology sometimes to trace these companies from a European perspective. When it comes to the question around green capitalism and green colonialism, I think it's really important. I think it's already been touched on briefly in the Palestine context, what that looks like, but I can just highlight it a little bit more. But first, to kind of explain the term, I guess, I think green colonialism is a way of saying that whether the resource might change, we might be talking about solar energy, we might be talking about wind power, but the systems of colonialism and capitalism that operated will always remain the same, and therefore so will the violent extractive practices that it uses. A lot of research around green colonialism has been pioneered by Palestinian and Arab scholars. I would recommend a great book called Dismantling Green Colonialism that was written by Hamza Hamouchine, and also has Palestinian scholar Manal Shakir in it, where she talks in detail about the ways that renewable energies are utilized as a method of control in Palestine, and also kind of normalization and expansion of the settler colonial project across the region outside of Palestinian borders. And gas also fits into this, but it's often left out. And I think the reason why gas fits into this is because the way that, for example, the European Union, but a lot of other bodies justify the expansion of gas is to call it a green, sustainable and renewable technology. In fact, under the EU, it's in fact listed as a sustainable investment. And so what this does is it provides a kind of cover for fossil fuel expansion, and particularly gas, to fester and quicken. So when we talk about green colonialism, yes, we're talking about solar panels, and yes, we're talking about wind, but I think it's also important to think about gas within that and how it's kind of used as a method to expand it. I think the Gastivists have done a really good job generally at thinking about the way that this has taken shape across the East Med, but also a lot of other places more broadly. And I think what we're looking at when we're talking about green colonialism is industrialized green colonialism. So big solar farms, big wind farms that have a sort of similar industrial landscape and effects as a big gas plant or a big coal plant or a refinery. And so the effects and the experience of these are very much the same. And they're reproducing similar kinds of violences to the way that fossil fuels have done for decades in either new or the same locations as before. To draw on a couple of examples maybe to think about this, I wanted to look at the Sahara Desert. Another settler colonial context such as the Western Sahara from Morocco, and also the Sahara Desert more broadly, has become a kind of hotspot for rhetoric to talk about putting big solar panel farms in the desert. And the reason is because of similar kind of colonial language that tells you that the desert is barren, it's infertile, no one lives there, it's not useful. But in fact, this is a very colonial view of it. And it really dismisses the local life, the local use of the desert, the people that live there, the understandings of this landscape, and projects this kind of imperial idea of what this landscape is for and who can take advantage of it. So similarly, when we're talking about colonialism in this context, it's also thinking about who benefits from this huge industrial solar farm that is planned in the Sahara Desert. Is it the local people? Is it the people that have utilized this area for decades? Is it even the country more broadly itself? Or is it Western and Northern European powers that will kind of weaponize their own power dynamics and geopolitics to extract and export this energy so that they can seem like they are being a renewable energy power that's leading the way on green targets? This is often the dynamic we see. So it's not for local people, it's not for the nation in which we're extracting it from, but it's always proposed by and used by people of power in the global north. And so this is again what we mean by colonialism. Similarly, if we think about other kinds of green energy resources, I think it's important to mention hydrogen. My collective works a lot on hydrogen. I have to admit, I do not as much. I mostly work on gas. But a big project that we talk about a lot is a huge hydrogen expansionist project that's planned in Namibia. And this again is an export-driven project that is a kind of so-called green technology that actually uses a lot of gas in which to produce itself, and in addition creates huge water scarcity in the regions wherever this kind of project is produced. And when we say export-driven, what we mean is that it's kind of the energy is being produced for German consumption. So in this context, it's a relationship between Namibia and Germany, one that is built on decades of colonial violence, like a century ago, there was a huge genocide that happened at the hands of the German occupation and colonial powers that yet to this day is still to have reparations for. And this hydrogen project is planned on the kind of unmarked graves of this genocide. So the plans for this project are very much, again, weaponizing like German imperial power, allowing it to kind of be consumed by German people in order to push forward their own renewable energy targets. And it is kind of reusing land that it inflicted a genocide on a century later for its own use. So we kind of see how green colonialism takes place here. And we're constantly, through energy projects and energy systems, reproducing the same kinds of violences on the same lands. I mean, just to kind of briefly touch on Palestine, even though I think other people on the panel are much better placed to do that than I just wanted to re-emphasize what was said earlier about the systemic destruction of renewable energy. This, whether it be kind of wind turbines, solar panels, often that are funded by the EU, that by the Israeli military are systemically taken down, destroyed, prevented from being recovered in order to continue that system of control that was mentioned. And a continuous weapon of control by the colonial entity, and how this destruction is about ensuring.
Sorry, Chrissie, you froze for
sorry.
There. Now it's okay.
Okay, I was just going to say we can kind of see how like this destruction of renewable energies is about ensuring that Palestinians remain dependent on their occupier in order to have life-sustaining systems. So it's a very deliberate colonial logic, and the weaponization of renewable energies within this is just another kind of way that green colonialism takes place.
Thanks so much for giving us this broader perspective, and to go even more concrete into examples also from Israel. So Israel is also using renewable energy as a tool of oppression and land theft, and Gastivists have published a report on this. Naomi, could you tell us more about this?
Yeah, absolutely. And Chrissie just explained the dynamics at play in such a great way that maybe I'll focus a bit more on the practicalities. So I'm going to talk about something called the Genesis Wind Project on occupied Druze land. So in 1967, Israel occupied this land called the Golan Heights from Syria. And to this day, it's not internationally recognized as Israel's land. So it's still internationally recognized, well, internationally considered occupied land until 2019, when under the Trump administration, the US recognized it. But anyway, so it's this occupied land, and the Druze, for anyone who doesn't know, are an Arab ethnic group with a very unique religion in the Levantine region. And in this 67 war, 150,000 people fled from the region, and there were only around 6,300 people remaining. And today, there's around 26,000 Druze people living in the Golan Heights and about 22,000 Israeli settlers. So I'm sure others here, Rasha, please jump in if you want to build on what I'm saying or correct. But from our research, we understand that the Druze are quite an interesting case in the region, where they're in many ways rather integrated in Israeli society. For example, there's many Druze people who serve in the IDF. There's Druze people in Israeli parliament and even as diplomats. And then at the same time, most Jews in the Golan Heights would consider themselves, I mean, more Syrian than Israeli. You know, they're and like Syrian citizens under occupation, but overall Druze. And they suffer from being suffer on the end of many policies that are also used against the Palestinian people. For example, policies about how land is demarcated and who has access to what lands, like policies that will change the status of certain lands that make it easier for corporations to come in, for example. But also other such policies that put them legally as second-class citizens in the eyes of the Israeli regime, alongside Palestinians, even though they're kind of more represented in the IDF and in politics. Anyway, so it's a bit of a different case, and also an occupation. So even though there's more Jews people living in the Golan Heights than Israeli citizens, there's only about 5% of the land in the Golan Heights is under Druze ownership. And of course, it's exactly this land that has been marked for a massive wind energy project that would provide wind energy for the Israeli energy grid. So obviously it's not for the benefit of this Druze community. So already 39 wind turbines were built in 2023. And it's by a company called Enlight, which is headquartered in Israel, but has projects all over the world, including in Croatia. So Croatia also has an Enlight energy project. Sorry?
It's also wind farm.
Yeah. Cool, you know which one it is. Thank you. And yeah, and several other countries. And so this wind farm is really used as a tool to ensure the expansion of the Israeli settlement there, and to kind of cement and solidify the colonial occupation of this land. So first, the infrastructure is really built so that it literally blocks Druze villages from being able to expand, like the placement of the wind turbines themselves. And they're also positioned in such a way that leaves a lot of space for the illegal Israeli settlements to keep growing. So that's one very literal way they support the expansion. And then, and this is hard to explain, so I'll just give there's the kind of leasing from the pressure the companies put on the Druze people who own this land is to do with the kind of policies about lands that I mentioned earlier. Like, it's a complex situation where the corporations kind of force people to lease their land, and then if it's in the national interest and it's considered a security, important for security or something, then the people who own that land have less and less rights. So there's kind of this whole machine of bureaucracy around using this wind project to take land out of ownership of these Druze community. And of course, it's not a clear cut. Okay, we're taking this now. Yesterday it was yours and now it's Israel's. But it's this very slow and insidious and bureaucratized process that is happening with the help of this wind project. For example, to lease the land, the landowners needed to register their land with the Israeli authorities and use Israeli licensing regulations. So also this forces the Jews community to be legitimizing these structures. So it's really insidious and this really horrible bureaucracy mechanism, all under the image of, we're just creating a wind park because renewables are great, and internationally everyone's saying we need renewable energy right now. And finally, it's also really militarized. The Israeli Ministry of Defense signed an agreement with the energy company to ensure the maintenance of this wind project as Israeli security interests. So also this, you can see how all these mechanisms are coming together in combination with the idea, the associations with wind energy to cement a really strong and violent occupation and solidify it. And so already a lot of money has gone in, and already quite a few of the wind turbines have been built. But since October 7, the project has been frozen. So it's also important to keep an eye on this project now and support the Jews community and talk about it. It's one of these, it's very up in the air. We don't know how things will go. And there's been lots of demos, burning tires, mobilizations, huge protests by the Jews community to say no to these wind turbines, and a lot of pressure put on the Israeli government. So it's also a very inspiring example. I also recommend, if you just type it into Google, you can find pictures and articles quite easily. If you write like Druze wind energy protests. But yeah, so it's frozen. We'll see what happens. And I think it's a really clear example of how we can't fight fossil fuels without talking about the energy system, because this is not a win, you know? And when climate activists are apolitical or don't want to talk about occupation, this is what we open the door for. Yeah, so if anyone argues with you about that, because they do sometimes, it's good to have your examples ready, because sometimes people really need to be shown, because there's also a lot of more conservative environmentalists, I think, like Chrissie said, like others have said, especially in Western Europe, that really try to make the case that you don't need to be political or talk about occupation when you do climate work. So examples like this will make you stronger. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Naomi, for the perspective of Golden Heights. Rasha, if you want to add anything on that, feel free.
Yeah, I liked how Naomi tried to explain the picture, because not everyone understands that this is the political way the colonial regime works actually towards everything. I wanted to give another example that is, for example, some springs in the West Bank that I have visited, one of them in a village close to the city I live in, Ramallah. They call the place a natural reserve, and they prevent the Palestinians to come near the area. And under the Israeli laws, this is a natural reserve and you cannot get near the water there. And if they defend themselves by wanting to reserve this area and not wanting any people to come near it, and wanting to reserve it, and so on. And when you dig deep in it, they're controlling over our natural resources one at a time, you know. So another place, there's a really nice area they have near Nablus, and it's practically a natural reserve that was once owned by the Palestinians. And because it's in land in area B, which has control from both the Palestinian National Authority, that we can get into this area, but it has also some complications. They have some kind of control over it. They employ some of the workers there from the Israeli side, so they have they continue to have control over these very rich areas, whether they're rich in the vegetation or in the natural resources, like I mentioned before, the waters and so on. So how Naomi was trying to explain that if you look at the picture from a wider vision, you see that it's the colonial regime trying to take over the land, the natural resources, and everything, every single aspect.
Thanks so much. And Rasha already talked about ecocide and the environmental consequences of the Israeli attacks on Gaza. I know that PENGON, in collaboration with Newcastle University, has been documenting these consequences of Israeli attacks on Gaza through a project that's called War and NGOs, the environmental legacies of militarism. Will you tell us briefly about that?
Yeah, so this project was planned before the war, actually. We have been applying together with Newcastle to implement this project to study the impact of the previous wars on Gaza, to study the impact of the previous wars on the environment in Gaza, on the soil, the water, and the air, and every aspect of environment in Gaza. And we started working actually on the project beginning of October, and then the war happened. So this collaboration with the Newcastle University, we see that it's a critical collaboration, especially that, as I mentioned, the project started to be implemented during the war. We did everything during the war. We employed the main researcher from Gaza during the war, and you can only imagine having the job interviews, the scientists, the professors were in a hospital where they found some energy and some Wi-Fi connection to get into the interview. So that's only a brief about how everything was working. We have a team working in Gaza collecting samples, soil samples, water samples, and air samples. We tend to study the heavy metals and the impact of the bombings and all the weapons that were used in Gaza on the soil, which will affect eventually the land and the agricultural lands, and also the water. We started by studying the direct impact of the war on different issues, because once the project was written, it was written to study the situation before the war. So after the war happened, there were displaced people living in tents, and they were placed in a very non-systematic way. So this affected the accumulation of solid waste in the streets, the piling of the solid waste near the displacement refugee camps. This eventually caused a lot of effect on the land, and also some leachate of these solid waste unfortunately reached the aquifer, the water aquifer in Gaza. So this has eventually affected the quality of water that is in Gaza now. We have also studied the accumulation of sewage water in a lot of places, in a lot of streets, near where people were living in the camps, in the tents and so on. We have studied this, and we have gathered all of the data and information with pictures and with evidence. And this has been reported as a first report by PENGON. You can always go to pengon.org, www.pengon.org, and find our reports by this project, War and Geos, that we tend to have continuous reports up on the website once we have them. The latest one was called A Breaking Point, and this was focusing on the massive environmental destruction due to the Israelis' bombardment and the catastrophic damage to Gaza's environment. As I said, including the destruction of the sewage and water infrastructure, the pollution of soil and the water sources, and the emissions of toxic chemicals from the explosives, as well as from the weapons and the white phosphorus and so on. And also due to the collapse of the basic services, the health, the water, the electricity, and the waste management systems, and the destroying of 60% of the water infrastructure and 70% of the wastewater that is being discharged into the environment, like in the land, into the sea, and so on. And you can only imagine the effects of all of that and the continuous effects that will go on for years from now. So also this last report argues the environmental harm that is not incidental, and it's through a planned ecocide, and which is defined under international law, a war crime. And we also studied the long-term health risks and the fact that the residents are exposed to the toxic materials and the contaminated water and the food shortages, and all of that make the health risks even a long-term issue. And this all amounts to climate injustice and apartheid practiced by the occupation. So as a result, of this report, it was, as I said, called a breaking point, because Gaza is at a breaking point environmentally, socially, and politically. And the situation is a disaster, to say the least. We wanted to just have a few recommendations that not only a ceasefire is an immediate and urgent call for everyone, and that Israel has to put in accountability of performing war crimes, and it should be going to international courts and so on, but also the need for these Palestinians to be supported to get their sovereignty over their land. Meanwhile, we're still studying different issues. Actually, we're still waiting for the soil samples to be tested. We're testing the waters. All the tests have shown that 14 out of 20 wells in Gaza are completely contaminated by fecal coliform and total coliform. So it's a severe issue. We're still waiting for the soil tests, for the soil samples to be tested, and also the air samples. Once we have them, we'll have our second report. Meanwhile, we're studying the effect of the war on agricultural land. We're having in June, we'll be publishing a new report about the effect of the war on agricultural land. And also by the end of September, we'll have a report to focus on the effect of rubble, the accumulation of rubble on the environment and on the health of the people, which is going to be having huge health risks on people. So that's what we're studying at the time being.
Thanks so much, Rasha. I think it's just incredible that people in Gaza, the researchers and scientists are, while they're being bombed, still doing their job and just trying to bring to us what's happening, and you know what the journalists are also doing, but a lot of the Western world is just not listening. But yeah, just congrats and kudos to your colleagues, and yeah, it's just incredible to hear that. Thank you. And the last question, because we've been long here now, open the floor to the participants here for Anna. So last year, there was a call for actions to pressure Azerbaijan and Turkey to stop oil supply to Israel. There were many actions. Croatia also participated. But could you tell us more about that? Who else got involved? And will there be other calls for action like that in the future? So regarding energy environmental programs.
Yes, well, we have Cemre here who was part of a lot of these actions. I'm sure he can tell more about all the different direct actions that were organized in Turkey to protest. There were also protests that were held in Turkey's embassies worldwide. And the idea is to keep on building this pressure, because we believe and I think it's clear for everyone in this panel and in the room that the solution is not going to come from the institutions or from the governments. I think they have failed to provide a just solution for Palestine, and they are more part of the problem than part of the solution. So the idea is to keep on building people's power, and also keep in mind that all these energy supplies, all these fossil fuels that are powering and sustaining this genocide in Palestine, as well as the fossil fuels, is limited. And they will end. They are being energized and sustained by this, greedy fossil capitalism. And I think it is important that we understand all the connections between the different movements, that we understand that the Palestinian liberation is part of the global movement for climate justice, and that we really build on these networks and these interconnections, and that we keep on building these people's powers, because we do have the energy to stop this genocide if we put all these efforts together. So we are gonna be part of several direct actions. We are part of a global day of actions that is organized by the end of the month against Glencore, one of the companies that is complicit in extracting coal in Colombia and South Africa, but also complicit in massive human rights violations everywhere they operate. And I think is this, again, like this ability to build networks, to maintain what at the end of the day unite us, which is our humanity, and to keep this positive energy is what will bring up change and help and contribute to the liberation of Palestine, and to transform this system that we are living in.
Thank you so much, Anna. I think this may be the perfect end for now. Thank you so much to all of you who spoke now. I think you deserve a big applause.